Systems course module on communication. We are going to talk about one of the systems to kind of hold all the other systems in place. It's a little bit like Frodo and the Lord of the Rings. This is kind of like the one ring to rule them all, because communications in your church is something that affects volunteers and leadership and giving and all the things that you have to do. So much of what we do in church happens because of communication. So we're going to talk about communications today and making sure that the right message reaches the right people. And very important, lots of stuff to get to today, so let's dive in. There is something that is extremely boring and extremely just like kind of lame. I mean, like when you hear me say it, you're going to go, I can't believe this is where we're starting. But there is something that really ties all of this together. In fact, there's one of the single most important documents your church can have. And I'm talking about a calendar. A calendar um, is so basic. It's so plain. I remember when I was in high school and college, I had a day timer, and this is when we used to write all our appointments down with pen or pencil. And I had a wallet-sized day timer, and I would carry it around. And every month I would have a little teeny spiral-bound notebook. Some of you had a day timer. Remember this, and maybe we should have a club. But every month I would kind of put a new little tiny spiral bound thing in there and rewrite some stuff in there. I mean, my day timer had a phone book in it where we used to write down people's phone numbers. But it had a calendar, and this calendar was so important to keeping organized, knowing where I was supposed to be and when I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do. And one of the single most important documents your church can have is a calendar. Now, the deal is many ministries in your church have a calendar. Maybe your student ministry has a Google Calendar, or your guest services team has, a list of dates, and your adult ministry has a calendar. And so lots of individual ministries in your church have their own calendar system, but the result of that is competition, that you don't have the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing. But all decisions in your church need to be calendared and communicated. And so if your final decision, if you have a meeting, here's what we're going to do to train volunteers. Here's what we're going to talk about. Here's when our vacation Bible school is going to be. Here's when the adults are going on their thing. Here's when small groups kick off. Here's when volunteer messages. If all of these decisions don't live on a calendar, you're going to compete with yourself. And so your final decisions don't just need to be made, they need to be written down on a calendar. And everything on your calendar needs an owner. Good communication in your church begins with good communication in your staff. And the place to hold all of this together is on the calendar. And so you've got to over communicate. You've got to calendar and communicate your decisions. All the decisions that happen in your church need to go on your calendar. And so our goal here in this module is to help you create and implement a communications calendar to where you write down, here's what we got to say and here's when we've got to say it. And although it's boring, and although it's not very cool, and it doesn't seem very advanced, a calendar will keep you on track. Now, there's two kinds of church communications, two kinds that you've got to master. First, there's communications within the church. Stuff that's going on inside the church that you need to communicate to church people. Okay? These are small groups. This is giving. These are events. This is volunteering. Things that you need your church people, members, attenders, regulars, to know about. And there's so many ways that you can do this. There's so many tools for you can do this. But there's a model that we want to recommend, and that is the agency model. I want to recommend the agency model. And so, first we're going to start with the staff. Does your staff know what's going on? Is your staff on the same page? And if you follow the meeting rhythm that we talked about in the leadership module, you're going to have the foundation of this all together. And so your agency model has got to start with the staff. And so if you want people to go with you, make sure they know with you. If you want people to go with you, make sure they know with you. Here's what I mean. You can't have your youth pastor communicating to the students what's important to the church if your youth pastor is not involved in the decision. You're not going to have your small groups pastor talk about something that's going on Sunday if what's going on Sunday doesn't affect the small groups ministry. This is why your team needs to be together in the decision making, because if you want people to go with you, you got to make sure they know with you. And so the problem that happens is so much communication depends on various ministries in your church, but lacks focus. So if there's a big event coming up, you're like, hey, we need to let our small group leaders know. So we depend on the small group ministry to communicate. Hey, we need to let the parents of high schoolers know this. Hey, we need to let kids know this. And so there's all these different ways of communication going out, but it lacks focus. And so the agency model that we recommend, the agency model of church communications, is something that can really help your church. Now, here's what I mean by agency model. I want you to imagine that you've outsourced all your communications to an agency. Let's say you hired an agency to say, hey, we want you to run our communications. Well, that agency would come to your church and go, okay, what's going on? What needs to happen? And the agency would create bulletins. The agency would create a website. The agency would create the calendar, the marketing calendar, to make sure all the messages, because the agency isn't involved in any one ministry. The agency is running all the communications for all the departments. Now, your church may have 30 people in it, but you can still benefit from the agency model by appointing a communications director to say, hey, all the communications is going to run through me. All the communications is going to run through our team. So if we need a graphic, we submit it to the agency. If we need an announcement in the bulletin, it goes to the agency. And the agency is the one who handles the calendar. The agency is the one who owns the calendar. Now, if your church is big, you may have a staff person that does this. If your church is smaller, you may have a staff person that does this in addition to something else. If your church is somewhere in the middle, you may have a volunteer team. Church communications needs an owner. It needs somebody to say, I'm going to make sure that we're on message and on time. And if we need something that goes in the bulletin, here's a request. Here's a way to get it in. And so you can create an agency inside your church to handle all the different communications. And that agency needs an owner. Maybe a volunteer communications director, maybe a staff member. But your agency needs an owner so you can run all communications through the agency. Now, when that agency is in place, when you say, all right, all our communication can run through this person, through this department, through this team, here's what we recommend. That the agency, when you have things to communicate, that you communicate 7 times in 7 ways. This is the strategy. So the model we recommend is the agency model. The strategy we recommend is 7 times, 7 ways. So let's talk about what these 7 times and 7 ways are. First of all, there are announcements. Announcements happen in your church. And here's the deal. When we talk about announcements, most of us announce the special stuff. We got random things coming up. We've got something that only happens once a year, a couple times a year, and we spend most of our time at announcement time, whether it's the bulletin, whether it's the stage. We're going to talk about the stage. From the stage, announcing special stuff. But it's the regular stuff that's most important. The regular programs and ministries are the most important things that you can communicate. Even though we know this is true, like if your church has Sunday school classes and volunteer opportunities and opportunities to give, those 3 things that happen all the time, they actually power the whole church. They get very little announcement time because we're too busy announcing, the work day or the backpack drive. So what I want to encourage you when we talk about announcements is to calendar, intentionally plan when you're going to talk about the important thing. When do you talk about small groups? When do you talk about volunteerism? When do you talk about missions? When do you talk about the core things that are on your one-page ministry plan? When do you talk about giving and leadership and volunteers and groups? When do you talk about the most important things? And these need to go on your calendar. The regular programs and ministries are the most important things that you can communicate in your church. So many times we create great videos and come up with all the announcements for the special stuff, but we don't put time communicating our regular programs and ministries. So when you're announcing stuff, when your agency is planning, all right, what is the message that we're communicating? Start with the regular programs and ministries. 3 out of the 4 Sundays, you should be promoting stuff that happens all the time, not stuff that happens one time. Promote stuff that happens all the time. Promote next steps that are constantly available to people so you can move people through the strategy of your church. Here's a principle. Less is more. When you're making announcements, you don't want to communicate 3 or 4 special things that are going on. Talk about one thing that's going on. Just one thing that's going on. Now, how can you talk about all the important things? It's, if you can only do, everybody believes with the less is more stuff, but nobody wants to cut their thing, right? And so the reason that we end up doing more and having less effectiveness, we do the more is less strategy rather than the less is more, is because we're afraid to cut what doesn't matter. And so some of those one-time things, some of those special things, some of those things that apply to only 10% of the room, we end up announcing because we think, it's not going to hurt anything. It does hurt something. The more you communicate, the less people pay attention. And so you've got to make a commitment to announce the most important things that apply to most of the people, and just don't worry about the other stuff. Do you really need to announce to the whole church the workday that's happening on Saturday so 6 people can come? Or can you just personally text or call 6 people and ask them to come? When we announce stuff from the stage, we need to announce default to the regular stuff that happens all the time. And then we need to default to the stuff that happens that is applicable to almost everybody in the room. And if the majority of the room, the announcement is irrelevant for, you're conditioning people that your announcements are irrelevant. And so an announcement is a great tool when we announce the regular stuff and when that regular stuff applies to all people. Now, what's number 2? Number 2 is your handout or bulletin. Your handout or bulletin. And we put some templates, collected some good ones for you in the resource area so you can kind of see what's going on. There's some great tools. There's some great ideas. But a bulletin is a great way to reinforce what's going on, our handout. Now, some principles. Less is more. So many church bulletins are so busy. I remember growing up in a Baptist church, and on the back of the bulletin, it was listed the schedule for the week, and it was like, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and there were like 4 or 5 things going on every day. And our strategy, it seemed like our strategy. I didn't know that we had a real strategy, but it seemed like our strategy was to list everything, so we didn't miss anybody, and so we could communicate that we had something for everybody. Now, that doesn't really work. Same with our announcements. Our bulletin and our handout needs to focus on less things, but the regular stuff, where we communicate the things that happen on a regular basis. I'll give you an example. I remember we visited a church this one time, and it was our first visit to this church. I went with our family. We actually moved to a new town. We were looking for a new church to visit. So we visited this church, and they gave me a bulletin, and they sat down, and I'm starting to read the bulletin as the service is getting going. And it listed inside 10 ways to get connected at such and such church. And I was reading through all the ways. And when I got down to 7, 8, 9, 10, I was so overwhelmed with the number of options that were available to me that I wanted to do none of them. Because 10 ways to get connected is about 9 too many. I needed to know what the first best step is. I need to know the best step, not a next step. What was the one thing that as a guest would be the most applicable to me? Because there's no way 10 things could be all equally important to me and equally applicable to me. What's the number one thing I needed to do? The other thing is the bulletin, it talked about all the special events that were going on. It was talking about all the things that were happening this week and out of the ordinary, and it was the summer, and this is different. In fact, the whole day was different that day. It wasn't even a normal day. The schedule was different. All the activities of the day were different. The kids' ministry was different. And as a guest, that was a little bit frustrating because I wanted to know what the church was about all the time, not what it was about now. And so just like in your announcements, your handout or bulletin needs to focus on your regular stuff. Now, never is this more important than Easter, Christmas, and big days. On Easter, Christmas, and big days, you want to make sure that your bulletin talks about what's normal, not what's special. Because when you have guests there for the first time, that's when they're trying to figure out what your church does all the time. And so your handout should talk about your student ministry and your small groups and your kids ministry, not just all the special one-time things that are happening this Saturday. So that was number 2, your handout or bulletin. Here's a third thing. A third way you can communicate using the agency model and the 7x7-way strategy is email. Email is important. Now, a couple things about email. 2 kinds of email that you can use. You can use weekly email, and I recommend that you do this, to send a weekly email. And you may pick Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Those are probably the best days to send email. Probably not Monday, probably not Friday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And a weekly email with what's going on in your church. Now, again, I would not load this up with 17 different things. I would focus this on 1, maybe 2 things. Down at the bottom, maybe you can list a couple other things and links with next steps. But I would focus your weekly email on just one most important thing. I would keep it personal. I would write like a person to a person. And we've got some resources on email, how to write email, that could really help. And we'll put that in the resource library. But send a weekly email. It's a great thing. But here's the deal. I would not put new people into your weekly email. They don't have the context. So I would use a sequence. So a new person, anytime there is an action that happens, I would trigger a sequence that is about 3 emails over 10 days, and then I would drop people into your weekly email. So let me give you an example. So let's say you have a guest that visits this Sunday. Okay, if the first email they get is your normal Wednesday newsletter, they don't have any context. They didn't even ask for the newsletter. They don't know any of the things that you're talking about in the newsletter. It'd be far better for a guest who visits on Sunday to get a series of 3 emails that maybe describe kind of the three main programs of the church. That maybe is a picture of the pastor and their family, talking about why they're the pastor of this church and how they came to be at the church, and then maybe one invite to the next step for guests. And then after somebody goes through that email sequence, if they're still interested, then they can get the weekly email. Same is true with giving. If somebody gives money to your church for the first time, I wouldn't just start sending them financial information. They just gave the first time. I would send them a series of 3 emails that the first email says thanks. The second email is here's what we're going to do with your offering that you gave. The third email is maybe another next step to maybe like it's an annual report or just something like you move people through a sequence that you think about to go, what's the most important thing a new donor needs to know? A new volunteer, same way. Anytime there's an action that somebody takes, put people through an email sequence, then drop them into the weekly deal. But an email and a weekly email newsletter and a handful of sequences based on actions are great communication tools that you can use to keep your church informed. Next thing, a website or an app. Now, we're not going to talk in depth about a website or an app, but here's the deal. I recommend that your agency manages your website. Do not create a bunch of different websites for a bunch of different ministries. Also, I would really challenge you to think through, does your church even need an app? Okay? So many churches get sucked into the technology thing, and we end up poorly managing 6 different portals, when in reality, we should just have one good one that's fresh and that's updated. And so your church probably doesn't need an app. Your church probably doesn't need to, be on the latest social media thing. Your church probably doesn't need to live stream. Your church doesn't need to chase every single technology that's out there. But a website is actually the front door to your church. People will visit your website before they visit your church. And so your communications team, your agency, one of the main deals that they have needs to be the website. And so make sure your website's good. Make sure it's fresh. Make sure it looks great. There are too many technologies out there for church websites that look great for you to have a website that looks like it was from 2001. Fresh, clean, modern, minimal website that is updated, that has the basic information. If you're new, here's what you need to know. That has the 3 or 4 pages on your website are going to get all the traffic. So those 3 or 4 pages need to be awesome. You don't need to busy up your website. Same with the bulletin. With all the current, here's what's going. It needs to be what's all the time, what's fresh. What's going on all the time. Like when you come on a Sunday, this is what to expect. Can you update your website with events and have? Of course. But the most important pages on your website are your home page, your I'm new page, and your giving page. And again, if you want to push that out to an app, that's fine. But make sure your website is mobile friendly. And if you have a mobile friendly website that looks great on an iPhone, then you don't need an app. Then you can just focus on one thing. Again, less is more. Have a killer website. Number 5, another way to communicate, social media. Social media. Now, I want to give you a couple tips here on social media. Obviously, we could spend a whole time talking about social media. A few things to think through. Choose a channel and just dominate that channel before you add the second one. And so for many churches, that's going to be Facebook. Maybe it's Instagram. Maybe it's Twitter. Maybe it's Snapchat. Maybe it's Pinterest. Kind of those. As I'm recording this, those are the 5 big ones. But you don't need to create all those various accounts and post the same stuff to all of them. Choose a channel, choose a champion, and then be engaging and be helpful on that channel. So for most churches, you could have a volunteer social media team. We have some training on this in Churchville 1. You can build a volunteer social media team that shares stuff on Facebook. I would start with Facebook. Facebook is the biggest social media platform there is. And your church can have a Facebook page, and you can have engaging content that gets shares, that gets likes, that people are talking about and engaging on. And then once you have that going, you can add another channel. But don't feel overwhelmed. You don't need 50 different social media channels. When your church grows, when your volunteer team gets bigger, you can add other channels. But for now, just choose a channel, choose a champion. Choose a channel, choose a champion, and kind of dominate that one thing. Now, let me give you just a power tip when you're talking about communication. There's something that's called a Facebook custom audience. And you can Google Facebook custom audience and see how it works. But your Facebook champion can do this. You can basically upload your church database to Facebook. And Facebook's not going to email those people. They're going to keep that information safe. But you can upload your email list to Facebook, and Facebook will match those email addresses to Facebook accounts. So let's say you upload 1,000 email addresses. Facebook will get that data and go, okay, we see 500 Facebook accounts of people that use those email addresses, and they create a group of that called a custom audience. And then you can go and create a post, and you can boost your post or run an ad just to that custom audience. In other words, here's why you would do this. You can advertise internal church things on your Facebook page, and it'll only be seen by your custom audience, aka your church, not the whole community or world. So when would you want to do this? Well, invite a friend for Easter. You want to share that to your church. Hey, set up online giving. You just want to show that to your church. And these are great advertising dollars because they're highly targeted to people who are already connected to your church. And your church should absolutely use Facebook custom audiences. Hey, don't forget to invite a friend. Hey, don't forget to give. If you want to talk about the workday, boom, that's when you can do it. And now you're hitting people. The deadline for camp, registration for camp. You can hit people on social media who are already connected to your church without blasting your community and sharing stuff on your page that's irrelevant. So again, the principle here that we're talking about is getting the right information to the right people. Your broad social media page, yeah, you just talk about your community, share what's going on. But if you use a Facebook custom audience, you can communicate with your church on social media. And the reason that's so important is because that's where they are. They're looking through that stuff when they can take action on a random Tuesday. Think about it. You hit somebody on social media about setting up an online giving profile while they're on their computer at their house or at work, when they can actually go and set up their profile. You remind them to invite somebody for Easter and link them to some shareable graphics that they can share right on their Facebook page while they're on Facebook. This is the power of social media and custom audiences. And almost every social media channel has something like that. That's Facebook custom audience, but the other ones have it too. So let's go number 6. So there's your pro tip, Facebook custom audience. Number 6 is volunteer huddles. In person. Don't forget that when you have an event coming up, when there's something, the big season coming up, volunteer season or group season or a event that you want to communicate, don't forget your in-person teams. And one of the ways that we used to do this is our volunteer huddles. On Sunday morning, our volunteers would get together for about 10 minutes before the service. We called it a VIP meeting. We would do vision, information, and prayer. Vision, hey, here's a story from last week. You guys in the kids ministry, we had this new mom. She came, tell a quick story. Cast vision for why people are serving. Information, here's what you need to know. And this is where, if you're syncing up, you can communicate something in person that they're also going to hear from the stage, that they're also going to get in an email, that they're also going to see in Facebook or on Facebook. And so in person, don't forget that when you have groups of people, if they know what's going on, then they can share that with their groups in person. And we used to do it at our volunteer huddles, vision, information, and then prayer. And every Sunday morning, we recognized that we would have dozens and dozens of people gathered together to pray, to serve, to work in the church, that this was a communications opportunity. And we couldn't distribute 13 different messages, but we could distribute one message. And if all our messages were aligned, then we had the opportunity to move people to where we wanted them to go. Number 7 is visuals. Don't forget your visuals. Anytime you want to anytime you have something big to communicate, create some visuals. So let's say there's a new change in service time. You want to create slides. You want to create a banner. For Easter, you want to create slides. You want to create a banner. You want to create print collateral. If you're kicking off groups, you want to create slides. Make a banner. You want to print up little cards and give them to people. Don't forget your visuals. There's a great, and again, you can use visuals throughout all these channels. 7 times, 7 ways. These are 7 different ways that you can communicate. Now, let me give you a little best practice. When you've got a big change to come up, drip before you drop. Drip before you drop. So leaders shouldn't be surprised and hear something from the stage for the first time. I remember one time I was working at a church, and I was on staff at a church, and I heard we were starting another service in the service. I didn't even know. And obviously, that was a mistake. But I didn't even know. I heard about it. I was like, oh, I guess we're doing that. And I'm on staff at the church. And that made me feel terrible, right? Because it's like, man, I guess I'm not as important as I thought I was. But here's the deal. Your leaders should not be surprised when something gets announced. They should not hear something from the stage for the first time. If you want your leaders to go first, Make sure your leaders know first. Make sure they hear it first. So big decisions shouldn't be dropped on people like a bomb. You want to trickle the information out so by the time you go public, you already know. So example, a change in service times. If you're changing your service times, you want to let your staff, obviously is going to debate that, talk about it, make some decisions, get all your staff on the same page, then go to your key leaders. Then you want to go to all your volunteers. Then you want to spend about 2 weeks telling people what's coming. And then you want to go back through all these channels. We want to make announcements. We want to put it in the handout. We want to email people. We want to make sure it's on our website, new service times. We want to push it through social media. We want to tell people in person why we're doing it. And we, ask people to go to different services. And when we create visuals about it. So if you're creating a change in your service times, you could follow this 7 times 7 way strategy and make sure this big decision gets pushed out through all the appropriate channels. So let's say you're launching a group. Here's another thing, group launch. Well, we want to follow all these channels. We're going to get together with our staff. We're going to decide when are we going to do it. When's our season? All right, it's going to be in September. All right, what's going to happen the 3 weeks leading up to it? We're going to create our calendar for group launch. And then we're going to use 7 times 7 ways. Announcements. Who's going to do it? Our announcement. You know what? This announcement needs to be a video. This announcement is going to be our small group pastor. This announcement is going to be our pastor. So 3 weeks leading up to it. Hand out our bulletin. Special card. Special emphasis. Email. We're going to send an email sequence to our whole church with stories about people who are connected with groups. Our website is going to be updated with stories of groups and information about where people can sign up for groups. Social media, we're going to tell stories of groups and make it all groups all the time for these 3 weeks. Volunteer huddles, we're going to talk about what group you're in. We're going to share stories and we're going to create visuals. We're going to create a physical place where people can sign up for groups in our lobby. See how it works? It's a focused communication plan. It's a single message distributed throughout the entire church. Now, I put together a communication calendar that will help you, and it's for communicating a big decision, like we're launching groups, like we're changing our service times, like we're starting a new ministry. And you can play around with the dates, you can move stuff around, but this communication calendar can really help you use the 7 times and 7 ways approach to communicating big decisions throughout your church, to communicating inside the church, what's going on inside the church so your church people can know about it. And it's very important. It's very important, and this will help you do it. So the second thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about communicating outside the church. So in the next video, we'll talk about how to kind of do communications, not just about church things to church people, but throughout the community. How do you let your community know what's going on? So we'll hit that in the next video.